All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I've begun recording. Good afternoon, everyone, and or good morning, depending on what time, I guess. Well, I guess it's still afternoon, depending on what time zone that you happen to be in. This is the first Society of Agricultural Communications Scholars webinar for this calendar year. We weren't able to do one for January, but we're happy to have Kenneth Kessler, who will be talking with us today about online engagement. And as we know, the last couple of years, we have done a whole lot of online things. So I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say to us about how to engage our students in a more of an online format there. Afterward, we will have some time if there are some questions, and I'll let you decide if you want to do questions during or at the end. And then at the very end, we usually have a little bit of time for those who might have some updates in your department and other aspects as well. And then we'll be done for the day. So with that, Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you and tell us about online engagement.
Awesome. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to span it out so I can see everyone's wonderful face here today. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I know that it is a holiday for many of you, so I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to come and see this presentation. A little bit about me. My name is Kenneth Kessler. I am a lecturer in the Agricultural Communication program at Utah State University. This is my alma mater. I graduated here, loved the program. I had a wonderful instructor that really inspired me on my path that I am on today. And so I've been here since I officially started in January of 2020, right before the pandemic. And so I've had a lot of online teaching experience in my short time as a lecturer. And we're going to talk a little bit about engagement today in today's presentation. So to get started, I'm pulling my content from these 4 texts. The first is Resilient Pedagogy by Thurston, Lundstrom, and Gonzalez. And then Hitting Pause. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with that text. It's a fantastic one by Gail Taylor Rice. The Missing Course, Everything They Didn't Teach You About College Teaching by David Gubler. And then How Humans Learn by Joshua Eiler. And then really kind of the thought process for this presentation began last year in a society meeting as well by Kara Lawson. And she was talking about the different skills that future agricultural journalists needed to be successful in the industry. And we started a really good conversation there, talking about how students need to be able to communicate interpersonally and work in teams. And so kind of the idea for this presentation stemmed there, because what I have noticed in my teaching is a need recognized by the industry that our students need to meet this standard, and then a lack of that within our own classes. And I noticed a lot of you saying similar comments as well, that you really struggle to maybe engage with your students, or your students struggle to engage with one another. And I think a really good example of this was I had a guest speaker in one of my classes, my Introduction to Communications class, and she talked about an intern that she had who was a phenomenal writer, fantastic in every way. And she asked her to write a story on a 3-generation cattle family, and provided the names and the numbers for those people that she wanted interviewed for the story. And as the deadline was approaching, she reached out to her and asked, hey, where's the manuscript, the draft for this magazine article? She said, I'm still working on it. I've run into some complications, but I'll do my best. And she said, okay. And the deadline came and went, and she reached out to her and said, hey, where's that article? I need to get this published. And she said, I've really been trying, but I just can't get them to respond to my texts. And she kind of was really frustrated with that scenario, because the oldest person in the story was in his 90s and actually didn't have texting capabilities on his phone. And that student lived in the same city that these individuals lived in. So she always stresses now to me that she's looking for people who are willing to communicate with one another face-to-face or over the phone, because she's noticed a disparity of that. And I've noticed that in my classrooms. I haven't been teaching for very long, but I have noticed that some students would rather fail the class than reach out in an email or meet with me over Zoom. And so today I want to talk about maybe how we can create a classroom to encourage that engagement within our content. So hopefully everyone's familiar with Poll Everywhere. In order to complete this poll, I want you to go to pollev.com/KennethKessler122, or you can text Kenneth Kessler 122 to the number 37607. And I'm just trying to get a feel. I know a lot of you are phenomenal research professionals. How many of you actually have teaching within your role statement? And so if you are 100% teaching, go ahead and select A. If you're about 75%, the majority of what you do is teaching, go ahead and select B. If you're about half and half, go ahead and select C. D, if you teach a little bit, maybe you guest lecture every once in a while. And then if you never teach in the classroom, let me know with E. Is everyone able to see that okay? You can either give me a thumbs up or click the emoji on the bottom. Everyone able to access that poll? Looks like I'm getting some submissions, so we're doing good. All right, some 0, some 50-50. %75 there. We got 100%. If you're that 100%, could you just do like a hands up emoji icon or something so I can see on my screen here? Awesome. Okay, it looks like we have a smattering. So hopefully what we talk about today will be relevant to each of you in your own classrooms. And I would like to say that I'm going to adapt this presentation. I teach both online. I teach a large writing asynchronous course with 175 students in it this semester. And I also teach several in-person courses as well. So we're going to adapt it to whatever role your role looks like in teaching. All right, we'll go ahead and move forward here. Let's see if it'll let me advance. Okay, so first off, we're going to go ahead and talk about engagement in the classroom. And I love this comic. Actually, Gail Rice starts the book off with this comment. And it says, they don't give us time to learn anything in school. We have to listen to the teacher all day. And I think a lot of times when we think of college teaching, we have the stigma of these large lecture classes where the most efficient way to communicate information is by presenting it in a lecture format. And we're hoping that if we just say the information and push it out there and quiz them on it later or do an exam, that means that we've done our job. We said the material, they've learned, okie dokie. And that's not really the case. A lot of the literature points toward more of a collaborative environment being a better learning situation for many students because it can have a lot of benefits, which we'll talk about here shortly. Now, when we talk about engagement, it's important to recognize the difference between student motivation and student engagement. And Lindsay Maslin in 2021 defines motivation as an internal drive that gives energy and direction toward accomplishing a goal. So this is a student's, for lack of a better term, desire to be able to accomplish a set goal, whether it's a goal you set as an instructor or the goal that they've set for themselves in the class. Now, engagement differs from that because it's the evidence that an individual has the motivation to move toward a goal. So it's the outward expression of that motivation, whether that's commenting in class, doing the assignments, etc. And so Lindsay puts forth this figure here that says student motivation is an internal factor which leads to student engagement. And I want to point out here that she says it's both internal and external. We'll talk about that here in a second. And then these two combined leads to student learning success. Now, I think that it's important to recognize that this is an internal and external factor because I myself have fallen prey to this misconception. And Lindsay puts it well. She says, if a student success is the product of student engagement, and if student engagement is the product of internal student motivation, then responsibility for the whole darn ordeal is simply not our problem. And I know I felt like that with my own classes, that I felt, sometimes you have students that you feel like you've done all you can and they're just not submitting and they're not engaging. And I think that that does happen. And sometimes that's just the choice of the student. But I do think that there's a lot of different impacts that we can also have to help facilitate that learning within our students and encourage motivation. And in order to do that, we need to recognize maybe some of those barriers. So a list of roadblocks for engagement that I found in a variety of different texts that I listed at the beginning of this presentation is first the classroom culture and environment. So if you don't have a welcoming and safe environment, that might inhibit your students from feeling welcome to participate or engage with you. A great example that's been brought much more to light recently is perhaps you have some kind of more minority discrimination. Perhaps you don't have your classroom set up in a way that makes everyone feel welcome. And in that case, a student might not feel as safe to engage with you or the content. Another example is maybe content doesn't relate to students or they don't have any previous background in this material. And that could be a barrier for engagement. I know that I felt that way. If I feel like a fish out of water and I'm in a completely different realm, I don't like to engage. And I think Abraham Lincoln has a great quote on this, that sometimes it's better to remain silent and appear a fool than to speak and to confirm it. And I feel students definitely live by that. So if they don't have the proper background knowledge for your content, or maybe it's just not relative to their experience, they won't engage with you. An additional example is unclear expectations or questions. Everyone hates that game. Guess what the professor's thinking, right? And so students don't like to look wrong in front of their peers. And if they're not quite sure if they've understood things correctly, they might remain silent as well. And then lastly, it's just burnout on one form of active learning. Maybe you are just an excellent teacher at one specific way and students get burned out by the end of the semester. And so they're not as interested or engaged with you because they're just burnt out of your traditional teaching style. So if we recognize that we do have an impact on student motivation, Lindsay adjusts her figure to look like this. So teacher choices, how you set up your classroom, how you involve students, how you make them feel safe can actually help impact student motivation, leading to that engagement. And then overall, what we hope for is student learning success. So one example that I'm going to put forth on how to engage your students, and this works both well in the face-to-face as well as online environments, is to add what Gail Rice calls pauses. And so these are just ideas, kind of like lecture breakers, if you have a traditional lecture classroom, that let students kind of take the responsibility for their learning and involve and engage with you in that way. So the research that Gail puts forth is the reason behind inserting these lecture breakers into your classroom is to tap into the power of collaborative learning. Instead of just having one person going off on a tangent up at the front of the classroom, this lets students engage. And a lot of research has shown that when students are actively involved in the learning process, they tend to remember it a little bit better. It also lets them provide feedback to you on where they are at in the content that you're presenting. And so this is a lot easier in a face-to-face classroom. I'll be honest, it's easy for me when I'm lecturing to be able to gauge my students' body language and verbal cues. So if I can see that maybe they have a confused look on their face, maybe they're checked out, they're looking at their phone, that's an indication to me that either I need to adjust my teaching strategy, maybe they don't understand it, maybe they understand it too well and now it's boring for them, and I can take on those nonverbal cues. It's a little bit harder in a setting like this on Zoom because either, they're a really tiny, figure on my screen, or maybe they have their camera off and I can't see them at all. And so implementing lecture breakers that lets them come in and engage with me will help me understand where they're at with content. I already mentioned this, but it helps them increase retention of the material you're presenting. It can also create a safe learning environment. If you build in really well-built lecture breakers, it can help them familiarize themselves with you and their peers and maybe make them feel more welcome. It also helps focus attention and generate curiosity and anticipation. Now, there's different technology that you can use in both your face-to-face and online classrooms. These are my three favorites. So we've already experienced Pull Everywhere in today's lecture. I love to use this. It's great for Zoom because sometimes it gets rid of that awkward pause for a lot of people. It lets them go ahead and just feel like they're anonymous, put their comments on. I hear from students who maybe don't feel comfortable engaging with me in a classroom in a verbal setting. I also use it in my face-to-face classes. Kahoot is really fun. I always find that my students like to enjoy any kind of gamifying system. I know that Kahoot has gone to more of a paid version, so my colleague, Dr. Kelsey Hall, recommended Quiz, and I actually just used this for the first time in my classes last week, and they loved it. I can highly recommend. It's really fun, and it has more of a focus on helping them remember the questions that they got wrong, and it gives them a chance to redeem themselves, which cements that learning process for them. And then Quizlet. I love Quizlet in both my face-to-face and online classes. Quizlet has a live component that lets students engage and compete with each other in a classroom setting. I can also assign sets to students in my online class and let them practice and rack up points that way. So it's a really fun way to introduce some of these pauses. Now, I pulled a couple pauses that I really enjoy in my classroom. First off is the starting pause. I like to use these three. I would recommend, we don't have a ton of time to delve into each of these. I recommend getting that book by Gail Rice. It's phenomenal. I love using the quiz time start. So a lot of times I'll look at learning objectives for my course and then I'll ask them quiz questions before I've introduced the material. This is great for two reasons. One, it gives me a basis of where they're already at with the material. So maybe if a student does really well on a question, I'll skim over that lightly. But two, it also indicates to them what they should be paying attention to in the lecture. So if they've already been quizzed on it and then they hear it in the lecture, they'll hone in on it a little bit more. Number two is the YouTube story start. I would say any kind of video at the beginning of class is really helpful. Students like that visual audio component to a class. It's different than just hearing my voice constantly. That being said, be careful with the videos you select. I like to use really short, TED Talk pieces or fun things like that. If you're going to start a class with a 20-minute, video and you turn off all the lights and it's 7:30 a.m., you're setting your students up for a really good nap there. Third is the entry ticket. This can be done in a variety of ways. One is I like to hand out note cards at the beginning of my smaller face-to-face classes, and I can start them with a prompt, either, let me know what you already know about the content. Maybe I'll post a question on the screen I want them to answer, or I'll have them ask me a question of what they want to get out of the lecture that day. I'll briefly scan it before the start of class, and then I'll tailor my content to them based off of what they've indicated there. In my online classes, sometimes I'll have them do quizzes before they come to class, and I'll review those before we even start the class. To get an idea there. Then there's mid pauses. I like the short write. I'll usually pose a question in the middle of class. I'll let them write it down. And I really like my students to write down their answers. That way I know everyone is prepared with some type of response. I don't like cold calling very much. But if it comes down to it and I'm not having a lot of engagement, I do know that they have something. So maybe I'll ask a student, hey, can you share what you wrote with the class? Everyone's familiar with the think, pair, share, right? You pose a question, you let them think about it, they share it with each other, and then you pose it with the class. And then the pause procedure questions, very similar as well. Closing pauses, I love trivia like Kahoot and quizzes. Exit ticket, maybe that I ask them to write down something that they'd like further clarification on or their favorite point of lecture. I really enjoy having them write exam questions. So I'll say, based off today, just write a really good exam question. And then I take the ones that I feel are really well written and I include them in my quizzes. I don't do any big comprehensive exams in my classes, but I do weekly quizzes. And so if someone provides a really good quiz, I'll include it in there. And students just like seeing their work. It makes them feel really kind of fun and engaged in the course in a different way. All right, so I wanted to open up to you. I am definitely not the end all be all when it comes to online engagement. If you want to share for the next, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, what activities or pauses do you use in your classroom? And feel free to unmute yourself if you feel comfortable with that, or you can drop it in the chat that I'll be monitoring as well. So are there any things that you like to incorporate into your lectures to maybe engage students and have a little bit more fun? Give you a minute to think about it. Feel free to call it out whenever you're ready.
Hey, Kat. So I love this so much. So whenever I start a class, just to get to that point of feeling safe in like a welcoming environment, actually something that I do is I call it tell me something good. So every day we come in, we start off with a positive entry point where they tell me, I woke up on time, or hey, got a job promotion, or I'm an aunt or an uncle, or whatever it is. It allows me to see them outside of the classroom, but they also get to know their peers in that way too. They can say, oh, well, I'm an aunt too. Cool. Like they can bond through that, and they actually build up discussions later on in class when I'm asking them. So it's not always just content related, but it's just like, how are you? How is it going? But we always start with tell me something good. And sometimes it really is this like, I don't really have anything. I'm like, well, you're here. Cool. You're in class. That's our positive. And we start from there. So it's something I love to do.
Awesome, Lucy. Thank you so much. And I love that you share that it doesn't necessarily have to be content related, because if we know our students as persons and not just statistics in our class, that helps a lot. I actually just recently had an experience last week where I did something similar. I just said, anyone have anything exciting that happened over the weekend? She shared that she got engaged. It's really exciting. And then she's creating a logo in my class, and she's doing some kind of personal branding for herself. So she asked me to look at her logo, and it's her initials. And I asked her, I'm like, this is awesome. Are you planning on changing your last name? Or are you going to keep your maiden name? Like, kind of what's the plan? And she was like, oh, I'm changing it. And I said, okay, so do you have the same initials for your married name? She hadn't even thought about it. She was like, oh yeah, like in 2 weeks, this logo is not going to be really effective anymore. And so knowing our students as people can help us tailor that to them as well. Awesome. Any other comments or thoughts? All right, looks like Austin said, I've been using Microsoft Forms to ask reflection questions in class and track attendance. It generates a quiz specific QR code, and since the login through 365, I get an Excel sheet with their details and nice charts for iClouds, etc. Awesome. I'm not familiar with that tool. I'll have to look into it. I know here at our institution, we use a platform called Kaltura, and there's pros and cons to it for sure. But one feature of it is that it does let you include similar quiz questions, I'm assuming, and it sends me a report as well on how students are doing with content. It's not for any points in my class, but I do like students to engage in recorded lectures for my online class. Any other thoughts before we move on? I've used that one before, Erica. Cases, that's a good point, Caroline. I like that. Including something that lets them talk back. And this can include discussion questions as well, right? Similar to what we're doing right now. Awesome. Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay. All righty. So I want to wrap this section up with this quote by David Gubler. And he says, I've come to realize that the best courses I've taught, when the students seemed to learn the most, were the ones in which they formed a real bond with each other. They came to know and trust each other and seemed to honestly like spending time together as a group. Those are the classes in which I've had to quiet the students down at the beginning of class because they are too busy animatedly talking with each other. And I think that goes back to Lacey's point, just engaging with students as humans and creating a classroom where they feel safe to engage with you and each other. So going on to that, let's talk about student-to-student interaction right now. And I want to talk about in-class teamwork. And we're going to approach this from both an online and face-to-face. And I need to be completely transparent at this point. I have tried to incorporate teamwork into each of my classes, and sometimes I have succeeded better than others. And so I'd love to give your feedback and your thoughts on this so I can help incorporate it into my own classes as well. So just to start off, I want to see how many of you use some kind of team-based learning project in your classes. So you're going to go to that same pollev.com/KennaKessler122. If you still have it pulled up, just refresh your screen and this question should pop up, or you can text that number on the screen and let me know how much team-based learning you incorporate into your classroom. Do you love it? Do you use it all the time? It's a major part of your courses. Go ahead and select A. If you've used it some and you enjoy it, go ahead and select B. If you've used it a little, not very much, but you have tried it, select C. And if it absolutely terrifies you and you never want to use it in your courses, go ahead and select D, just to give me an idea here. So it looks like overwhelmingly right now, people have used some in their classes. So I'm assuming that probably means you use it in some classes, but not others as well. Someone uses a lot. We'd love your feedback throughout this presentation. I'm not seeing any a littles or nones yet. So I think it's probably fair to assume that most of you use teamwork in some way, which is awesome. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and progress it. Please provide your feedback here. So I know this is a really long quote and it's just a wall of text on your screen, but I couldn't trim this down any more than I did because I feel like this is a great example of why we should incorporate team-based learning into our classes. So Lindsay says, to really maximize the relatedness that students feel, we need to focus on student-to-student interactions in our course, regardless of the modality. In fact, some research suggests that of the 3 types of student interactions in a course, so that's student-to-student, student-to-content, and student-to-instructor, it is the student-to-student interaction that is most predictive of student success. And then I love this part right here. Group work has been shown to decrease anonymity, center cooperative learning, provide needed scaffolding, and validate lived experiences. So in my study, I found everywhere that teamwork is a vital part of student success. And then personally in anecdotal experiences, when I've talked to professors, it's something that we're almost scared of. Because I'll be honest, it's hard. It's hard as an instructor to incorporate a team project in an effective way. And so what I'll show you now is some studies that I found and some advice that I found in different texts that tell me how I can better incorporate team-based learning. And I'd love your feedback as well. So I love this one. This is the 4 essential principles of teamwork. And this is by Winter, Clark, and Burns in 2021. I'll go over each of these much more in depth throughout this presentation, but the first is teams must be properly formed and managed. 2, learners are accountable for individual and teamwork. 3, assignments must be properly constructed to promote learning and team development. And 4, students must receive frequent and immediate performance feedback. All right, so first off, teams must be properly formed and managed. Everywhere I found has recommended to have diverse students within a team. Don't try to keep a bunch of like-minded individuals all together. Instructors should select these teams. They should not be student selected. But I do want to put a little caveat in here that it's great to have diverse teams, but please avoid stigmatization or marginalization. I think it's very, very easy to try to create kind of a token minority in each of the groups, and that puts an immense pressure on them to be able to communicate. And it can be terrifying if you're the only minority in a majority group to feel like you can express your thoughts. So please be careful of that when forming groups. I've seen a little differing literature about the size of teams. What I found is most texts recommend about 5 to 7 for an in-person class where you provide time in class for them to work as teams, but about 4 for online. And I can tell you in my personal experience, my sweet spot is 3 to 5. I usually assign about 4 or 5 at the beginning, just in case we have an issue with a student where we have to remove someone during the semester. And so if you start out with a team of 3, some groups might go down to a team of 2. So I'd recommend at the start, hopefully about 3 to 5 by the end, assign 4 to 5 in a group. Everywhere I've found says that teams should be permanent for the life of the course. And I found that in the text, but in conversations, I've had a lot of colleagues recommend switching them up to help with team work. I'd love to see some people's feedback on that. And then a lot of texts also recommend contract development. And I do this in my own class, and I think it's very effective. So the very first meeting, they meet and talk about what expectations look like in a team, right? How are we going to communicate? What's our plan? How often do we want to meet? What are we going to do if someone's not pulling their weight? That kind of stuff. And that way, every student is on board with what's expected of them at the very, very beginning. It's also nice to have a physical expression of this agreement, just so that if something does come up, you can say, well, let's look at what you guys agreed to with the team contract. And that helps a lot in facilitation in the instructor end. All right, next is learners are accountable for individual and team work. And so I'm going to talk about a little bit how you can prepare your students to come prepared to class with teamwork. So there's individual pre-class preparation, there's contributions to the team's problem-solving activities, and then there's participation in high-quality team performance. So before they even come to class, I would recommend having your students prepped and ready to go with the content. And what this avoids is usually in every group, there's an overachiever, right, who's done all of the reading, they understand the assignment, and they come to class, and then their peers come and they haven't looked at the readings, they don't know what's expected of them in the assignment, and then valuable time is wasted with that overachiever trying to fill them in and update them before they can even start to do any kind of teamwork. Everyone has to be on the same page. I recommend avoiding that. I have pre-class quizzes. So before they come to class, they need to indicate to me and answer a series of questions that shows they know what to expect, they know their content, and they're ready to participate fully. Then they need to contribute to the team's problem-solving activities. So this isn't the actual project yet. This is any kind of brainstorming or planning or meetings that take place. And then they also need to participate in a high quality team performance. So they need to do their part to turn in the final artifact, whatever they're going to do to show that they've accomplished the learning objectives. Now, what I see a lot of students try to do is they'll check out of the problem solving activity approach and they'll just do their part and submit it. They don't really want to engage with students. They're going to handle it as much of as an independent project as possible. They'll ask for an assignment, they'll turn it in, and they'll check it off. And they're not actually interacting with each other. So just make sure that you have barriers in place to make sure that your students are contributing at each part. Now, the way I do that is my areas of accountability are that pre-class quiz, which we already mentioned, but then I have my students complete peer evaluations. And so I teach a business writing class, so I actually have it in the sense of a mock company. And so they complete supervisory reports. So I have a list of criteria I want them to rank their peers on anonymously. I have them give them a score of 1 to 5 on each of these points. And then I take the average out of 5. So if a student averages, 3.5 out of 5, then I times that by 10, and that's their grade out of 50. So they would get a 35 out of 50. Now, what I do is I have my peer evaluations have the same weight as the actual assignment they turn in, because my learning objective is I want them to learn how to work together as a team. And so however that looks, it can be messy sometimes, but I want them to put forth their best effort. And I care a little bit less about actually turning over the project, because I'm sure we've all been there before. A lot of times one student will do it just to get the grade, right? They just want the grade that they want. And I want to put the focus on the actual team development happening. It's important to check in with students there too and make sure that they understand that that is the point of the assignment. Sometimes you need to clarify that to them right off the bat, or otherwise, you know, students are smart. They'll take the path of least resistance and try to get the best grade for the least amount of work possible. All right, next up, assignments must be properly constructed to promote learning and team development. So when you're constructing your assignments, think about and ask yourself these questions. So first, what do I want the students to be able to accomplish in order to demonstrate learning? And, you know, this is something I struggle with. It's really easy to create a really fun team example or a team assignment, but what are the learning objectives? What are you trying to get them to accomplish? What do they need to demonstrate for you to feel like they're proficient? Construct assignments to rely on the team, not the individual. And this is where I see most assignments really fail, is if one person can do all of the work on their own, that's usually what's going to happen. They're going to take over, they're going to monopolize, and the team is no longer a team at that point. And then make sure you provide enough resources to accomplish the task, including yourself. Make yourself available to the students. Be familiar with them so they feel comfortable coming to you and interacting with you and seeking help on the assignment. All right, lastly, students must receive frequent and immediate feedback. And so this includes instructor feedback. What I do in my courses is I'll leave annotations. Once again, I teach a writing course, so it's very easy for me to see their finished product. I'll leave annotations, but then I'll also meet with the group in a face-to-face or Zoom setting so that we can have a conversation. Now, I teach a very large course, and so I only have time to meet with each group once throughout the semester. In a smaller setting, I could definitely meet with them more. I have to utilize my teaching assistants a lot to help me. But if I do recognize if a team is struggling based off of those peer evaluations, I'll focus a little bit more effort. And that's also with individual feedback. So I'll let students know if I notice they're struggling individually. I set a benchmark for how low I'll let my students go on those peer evaluations, and mine is 4 out of 5. So if I see students scoring less than a 4 on those team feedback sessions, then I'm going to reach out to that individual. We'll set up a meeting, I'll talk and figure out how we can help them get back on track. Maybe talk about what barriers are preventing them from engaging in the team fully. The one I see most frequently is just lack of time. And so I'll discuss with students and maybe help them practice a little bit better time management skills. But sometimes, honestly, they just haven't saved time for that class. And they weren't planning on engaging in that class, especially my online class. They were just hoping to skim by with minimal effort and graduate at the end of the semester or something. And that's when we need to have an honest conversation about the reality that online classes are, and that they take just as much time as face-to-face classes and just as much effort as face-to-face classes. And then just team feedback as well. I'll let students know if I notice a common thread among teams' comments and say, hey, we really need you to step up in this atmosphere. Or, hey, I've noticed that you have this strength and your team is lacking in this. Can you go ahead and be the head point? Maybe you're really good at relationships. Let's help you make everyone feel welcome and involved in a team setting. Now, if you teach an online course, these are the suggestions that I'd recommend. First, you need to include some type of orientation, first to the team-based learning process. I have thorough explanations in the syllabus, and I have them take a quiz in the very first week of my class to make sure that they understand what's going to be expected of them in a team setting. One of those questions is even, it says, I know what's expected of me and I'm willing to put forth the effort to be successful in a team project. And if they go ahead and submit that, then I know that they are on board with everything going on. Also, you need to orient them to the instructor and their teammates so that they feel comfortable to engage with you. The way I do this in my class is that first week I have them submit an elevator speech. It's just a recorded elevator speech based off of a series of prompts, and I complete it myself as well each semester. That way they can watch my elevator speech and then all of the speeches of the people in their class. So before they even have their first in-person or Zoom meeting, they know a little bit about each other, and that makes them feel more comfortable. You also need to have a built-in instructor presence, and this can look different in a variety of ways. I record weekly announcements every week so they know me, they hear my voice, they see my face. And then I make sure that every single assignment a student submits, I leave detailed feedback and some kind of submission comment. Going back to Lacey's point, not always relating to the text, I'll have students share something in an assignment, and I'll make sure to comment on it so they know I'm reading it. They know that I understand them and that I'm willing to engage with them outside of just of an academic standpoint there. Make sure you have clear deadlines marked within your learning management system. And then more frequent check-ins are needed for an online class. You can get a good sense of how students are doing if you see them working in class. But online is definitely going to require you to check in with groups and say, hey, how's it going? How's everyone doing a little bit more frequently? Okay, I have done plenty of lecturing in this discussion on engagement. I want to go ahead and open it up to you. And it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 people on the call today. I'm going to split us up into 2 breakout rooms. And in those groups, I want you to talk about what concerns or hesitancies you have about integrating team-based learning into your classrooms. And then in that same group, go ahead and talk about possible solutions and share experiences. Let's do that for about 5 to 8 minutes, and then we'll bring it back and wrap it up with some final thoughts. So let me see, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And then I am going to go ahead and just assign everyone manually to a breakout group. So go ahead and join up, and we'll probably meet back here at probably 1:45 if that works for everyone. 1:45 my time. I guess that's 3:45 for most people. All right, you should be able to see those now.
That was good.
Awesome. Hopefully it's going pretty well here.
I'll pause it for you.
Awesome. So I heard some really good conversations going on. I'm going to just post that question in the chat one more time so you guys can reference it and then share kind of what you talked about or share what your neighbor said.
I really like in our group. Oh, sorry. You go first.
Go for it. Have at.
No, I learned so much from y'all, and I think I really enjoyed like the idea of thinking about the roles in the team and that being a way to get to the diversity aspect. One of my group members mentioned that she has students fill out a survey at the beginning of the class to talk about like what their leadership style is, and that helps her be thoughtful about forming groups and teams. So I thought it was really intriguing. And then we talked a little bit about developing skills. So, if a student doesn't have web design experience, finding that balance of like trying to push them out of their comfort zone and helping them develop those skills, or like not forcing the student to do something they don't want to do per se, if they're like, depending on like what type of course it is, if it's a capstone or some sort of skills building course. So really cool discussion and really, really thoughtful ways of assigning roles.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. I love doing that in one of my own classes where they each assume a role on a team. And so I let them cater to their strengths. So I have the editor and I have the human relations person that's good at, helping everyone communicate. And so I think that's a great way to divvy up groups. Lacey, did you have a comment?
No, Caroline covered it great. She did a good job.
Awesome. Any other thoughts?
I think our group said we didn't have a lot of concerns, that we saw the value in them and felt like they learned a lot of the needed skills from teamwork. We threw out some different ideas about contracts that you could have. Austin shared a book that he likes as that is a possibility. We also shared ideas for how to evaluate each other in the team and then discuss those evaluations along the way so they can have that opportunity to address the conflict within their group.
Awesome. And I think I caught on the tail end, you were talking about how you usually have that one student that does a lot of the work or that one student who doesn't participate. And I feel like that is the bane of every team project that I have ever been a part of. And I think that's why, we tend to avoid team projects even in the professional world, because sometimes that can cause us some stress as well. So hopefully you learned some ideas on how to mitigate that in today's lecture and from each other. So I know we're running short on time. So just to conclude, can everyone see that okay? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay. is I wanted to end with your very own exit ticket. And I know that this is not a classroom. You don't need to submit this to me for grading or anything like that. But hopefully, after we finish today, you can just take a few minutes and think about one key takeaway you have from today's presentation and how you plan to implement it in your own classroom. And then just try something new. It looks like a lot of you already are incorporating team-based learning. So hopefully you've been able to get some ideas to be able to take those to the next level. So with that, that is all I have for you guys today. Do you guys have any questions for me before we end?
Great. Kenna, thank you so much. Go ahead.
Sorry, I joined in like 5 minutes late. You mentioned a book. What is the name of that book again?
Yeah, so I mentioned 4. I'll go ahead and send you a private message in the chat.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank Kenna. Yay, great job. Thank you so much. We do have a few minutes here. If you have any announcements or updates from your program that you'd like to share with everybody or anybody. If not, I'm seeing blank faces or funny faces, kind of weird faces. Some of you making faces. That's okay. I do want to mention that next month we'll be back on our regular schedule, which is the 4th Monday of the month. Erica Earlbeck will be leading that discussion. She'll have I believe, a panel to talk about reviewing with the author in mind. That is the title of the session. And the scope of that is, how do you deal with reviews, and how not to write mean, nasty reviews, more or less is kind of the overall idea here. I think that I'll leave it at that. So she's provided me with a little bit of information that I'll share with everybody in a week or so when I send that out to everyone. But it should be a good discussion for all of us as we consider how we write our reviews for academic publications and presentations, and how we word things. So I'll leave it at that. So with that, any other last minute pieces, any comments? Well, we saw some of you last week at the National Ag Communication Symposium. Look forward to seeing folks at upcoming meetings as well. In our discipline, we have the National AAA meeting coming up in May, and then ACE coming up in June, and probably a couple other things too. And I think people are just ready to get out and see people in person. So looking forward to that. But in the meantime, and because again, we want to do this professionally, and this professional development opportunities for the webinars, please don't forget next month, March 28th, Erica will be presenting. And if you have any questions in between time, please let me know. If not, then y'all have a great afternoon. Bye, everybody.